Hi, and welcome to Podcasting 101 with Rachel. This podcast is for busy female entrepreneurs who run their own businesses and want to start a podcast or who may already have a podcast. I want to share practical information and tips on how you can get your podcast started and managing it along the way. I'll also be interviewing other female podcast hosts to give you real insight into what it's like having your own podcast. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode. I have the lovely Kendall Breitman here with me today. She is a community manager from Riverside.fm. For all of you that might not know what Riverside.fm is, it is an online recording studio for podcasts and video podcasts. It's exactly what we're recording on now. It's something, a platform that I decided to invest in this year, and I'm very glad that I did. So I met Kendall and we've been talking and connecting, and she has very kindly decided to agree to come on the podcast and talk to everybody. We were going to have a little chat today about interview techniques, how you can be a good interviewer for your podcast. Do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit more so everyone knows a little bit more about you, Kendall?
Yeah, for sure. So, as you said, Kendall, community manager at Riverside. And to back it up a bit, kind of why we had decided on this topic about interview questions is right now I'm working in the podcasting space. But before I got into this industry, my background's actually in journalism. So, I was a television and news producer for Bloomberg and for MSNBC and Politico, focusing on political coverage. But yeah, I guess you wouldn't be surprised on how difficult it is to really formulate an interview when it's about politics, especially with people who have rehearsed answers or who are doing a lot of interviews or people who have never interviewed before, like a voter or something like that. So my experience as far as interviewing goes kind of runs the gamut. So I'm happy to talk about any of that. And then as far as Riverside, yeah, as you said, it's a recording and editing platform for video, for podcasts, and just really is able to, because you have remote interviews, you're able to interview more people, get a diverse range of stories. And so this kind of just feels like a good topic to kind of distill all of these thoughts into. So excited to dive into it.
I know I just had a little look at your background. That's how did you get in just as a little bit of a,
Yeah.
interesting story. How did you get into that?
Yeah. So you mean get into journalism or go
Yeah,
kind of
so
from journalism to community
yeah,
management?
so how you got into journalism, did it go from kind of like school age college and then straight out the bat and then obviously migrating now into this kind of space?
Yeah, so I actually started as a breaking news reporter for Politico right out of college. And then as we were heating up for the 2016 election, I moved over to Bloomberg to cover the 2016 campaign. And so that was like living out of a suitcase, running around the country. We followed every campaign. So it wasn't just focused on Trump or Sanders or Clinton. We were following them all. Was doing that. And then after the 2016 election wrapped, move over to MSNBC to work on their 9 a.m. show for a bit and then work on a Sunday show with them for a bit. And then actually I moved because I relocated to be with my wife. And when I did that relocation, I kind of just looked at what I wanted to do because I didn't want to continue in journalism, wanted to try something new. At first, I thought that the natural progression would be to content because, journalism, writing seems like a good fit. But what I kind of found was that professional writing wasn't exactly what I loved. What I loved about journalism was stories and connecting with people, having 20 conversations a day and leaving it saying, what's the story here? Like, what needs to be told? And I actually found that community aspect, talking to people, understanding people's wants, needs, feelings, emotions, was actually what I loved about journalism. And so when I was approached by Riverside for a community job, it was something I never even thought of, but really just kind of fit exactly what I love and what I wanted as somebody who is a self-proclaimed extreme extrovert. So yeah, really, really fit everything that I wanted. And then, yeah.
So did you do journalism at college? Did you study that and then move into?
So I studied journalism and political science. So couldn't have predicted the fact that I went into political science journalism. So yeah, that was my background, and I got an internship at USA Today while I was in college, and that really just opened the door to make connections within national reporting.
Mhm. So did you feel like when you compared to your college education and then going into real life, I know that they
Mhm.
can be two completely different things because
Oh
you're
yeah.
learning about them in the safety of the classroom, so to speak,
Oh yeah.
and then obviously being out in the wild with everybody. So how did you find that change with your interview skills? So were you like in front of the camera, like you were the interviewer?
So I wasn't usually in front of the camera. If I were to go and collect interviews, it would kind of be me with a microphone spotlighting voters. Or so part of it, I would kind of split it up into two different things as far as like the election. So part of it was going into the lines outside of, let's say, a Trump event and asking all of these voters about their thoughts and feelings. So they're in front of the mic, I'm behind the mic. But then there would also be the journalists that I worked with interviewed almost every presidential candidate and their campaign directors, everything like that. So the second part of the job would be sitting down with these bigger reporters and deciding the order of the questions, how to pin somebody down on a certain topic, researching their background and other interviews that they've done. So it would usually fall into those two buckets. Either man on the street is what we called them, or these casual or these usual sit down interviews.
That sounds so fascinating. I always wanted to go into journalism when I was younger. That was one thing that I considered myself. That must have been a really great learning experience straight out of college to go and to especially covering the elections. You've got like such a diverse range of candidates and people that you would be interviewing, and especially if supporting the journalists with those kind of questions and what to ask, that must have just been quite thrilling.
Exactly. I mean, I was like 23 years old helping come up with questions that we would ask Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Like it was a real dream experience, but it was also cool because I came into journalism in my own way of just kind of learning through my first job. And then as you work with more journalists, you get to pick up how they form their interviews, what background research they're doing. And so you kind of start to create your own method based on little pieces taken by different people. For example, when I went over to Bloomberg, one of my first tasks that I had to do was watch a ton of interviews by a news anchor, I won't say which one, and basically figure out why they didn't love his interview style and what they would change about it. And so, like, really researching different people's styles, follow up questions, lack thereof. And it really just trains you on what interview did I, out of those 30 interviews, which one was my favorite and stuck out to me, and then really digging into why that is. So, really coming up with the method, the formula to it.
That would have given you a lot of experience then, listening to different people giving different information on what works the best, I
Exactly. You can,
guess.
yeah, you can listen to the same person interview
Mhm.
with five different anchors, and you'll get five different, completely different interviews. And even if they're asking the same questions, the way they ask them, the order they ask them, I would really recommend watching a bunch of different interviews and then just writing notes on what you liked, what you didn't like. It really helps create your own personalized method.
Mhm. Well, how does that then how did you bring that into I know at the moment you're working with podcasters. Is there a big difference between, because obviously, like, I'm not a trained journalist. I don't have those kind of interview skills. Are there a lot of podcasters that do have those types of skills?
I mean, it's different mediums. So if you are like people on TV are looking for the soundbite. They're looking for something that other news organizations will take that bite and then add in their own thing. So Bernie Sanders said this earlier on NBC, and then they play the clip. Like that's the goal is to get these really newsworthy sound bites. And that's also the goal in podcasting because we want to take those sound bites and tease out our show. But it's different because you're able to dive in a lot deeper in a podcast because people aren't watching a 5-minute interview. They're sitting down, listening. It's much different than television in the way that you can just put your headphones in and just kind of go about your day and have that podcast come with you through your day. So, I mean, I always find that podcasts are a medium that you're able to expand on people's like, personality, getting to know that person better than the goals that you particularly have in a news interview. I mean, both are trying to get a story. So there is some overlap, but I would say that if you're like podcasting is such a different medium that you don't necessarily need to ask questions like a journalist, but if you do frame the questions in your mind like a journalist, you might just get better interviews. They might flow differently.
Hmm. Yeah, like when I first started, I was very nervous and I kept thinking of it like a big interview. And that's kind of like journalist thing in my head was like, oh, I need to interview this person. But obviously the my first podcast was called the Virtually Inspiring Podcast. So I interviewed different virtual assistants about their journey and how they got there. So it wasn't like a hard hitting news podcast. It was a conversational one like this one
Exactly.
is. So I kind of had to kind of reframe my mind so I didn't make myself so nervous. So what I kind of like to do is have an outline of what we're going to be talking about, but I do like to have, not be so rigid in having to ask specific questions in case, something comes up in conversation. You can, part of listening to what, your guest is saying and then maybe taking a slight detour to what you had originally planned. But I know for when you're first starting, that can be quite daunting to do. Have you got any kind of little tips that you could suggest to somebody who's first starting, the little things
Definitely.
they could do?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say first to touch on what you were talking about before, to know your goal. So if there's some if the what's the goal of this interview? Is it to really like get to know this person better, to see them in a different light? Is it to like make them more personable, like really feel a connection with your audience? Or is it to get down to like how did this person go from X to Y? And kind of like laying out that goal will help keep you on track. And then a TV note that I have taken over to podcasting is what we'd sometimes encourage guests to do. Hosts can do this as well. Is you write like 3 to 5 bullet points on what like, your main points are going to be, what you really want to make sure that you get to. Because then as you kind of trail off, because as we're saying, podcasts are about conversations, they wind and weave. If you have that bullet point, you could just look over it really quick and say, let's bring it back to the second bullet point. I mean, you wouldn't tell them that it's a bullet point, of course, but
Yeah.
the idea is that you have them written down so that if you feel kind of like off in a different place, to be able to bring it back. And then another tip that I have is, as you were saying about thinking, listening to your guests, asking follow-up questions is so key. So come in with some questions that you want to ask, but don't get to all of them. Like don't we can my least favorite type of an interview is when it feels like question answer. Like have it flow, and the best way to do that is by asking follow-up questions. The best way to ask follow-up questions then would be like low-hanging fruit is emotions or zeroing in on a time. So, how did you feel when that was all happening? Like, even having that as a follow-up, were you nervous? Like, that just is able to let your guest expand more on who they are, their thoughts and their feelings. Or the other one that I was just saying that's now slipped my mind, but oh, moments that you wanna say, "I wanna really zero in on this exact moment when you went from journalism to community management." Like what you just did earlier in the interview of how did that pivot happen? Like zeroing in on moments and feelings and emotions are really easy ways to follow up with your guest.
Hmm. That's great advice. I think that if you are nervous as well, it's easy to forget that it is a conversation as well. And I think I did. I remember feeling very bad for the first few ladies that I interviewed because I just got very like I got lost. I couldn't remember what they said, and I'd like, oh, did I ask that question or did they answer that question? So it was quite rigid in that way, and I think that's sometimes our own little downfall if we are too rigid within our own what we have our expectation of what we think the podcast interview or chat's going to be like, and then
Yeah.
versus like what it's in reality.
I mean, like, if you think about it like a conversation, do you go into a conversation with your friend being like, I need to ask them about how their week was. I need to ask them what they ate last night. Like we wind and weave through our conversations. And so the more that you can make something seem natural, the more that it's going to engage people and make people want to pop in their headphones, walk through, like go on their commute and listen to the conversations that you're having.
Hmm. So, how long have you worked at Riverside now?
I have been here, I believe, a bit over half a year, which it feels like longer just because it's been like the amount of work that we've done in the community has been a crazy amount since I joined. It's been really exciting, but yeah, apparently only a half a year.
It's amazing. I think since COVID that it feels like a weird time suck. I can't remember, like, was it this year, that year? I think it's like changed my perception on how I'm viewing time.
Oh,
But
same.
how have you felt like the shift between journalism and doing the community manager? I know you said that you moved countries as well, and
Mhm.
was that a big impact on what you on how you worked, how you felt within your role?
Yeah, I mean, when you're a journalist, like it's every day or all your work is kind of like cut out for you in a way that I need a story filed by this time and this date on this topic. Or I go around and ask a bunch of different people questions and then I pitch. I want to write a story on why voters are driven by X and then kind of making a story out of that. I know the deadline, I know the date. Community management is a new, like, it's not new in the way that it's always been around, but for it to be a role and for it to be something that marketing that we're focusing on is new in the industry. And so every community manager that I speak to does things differently based on the community that they're managing. So my it's less cut out for you and more like, okay, I talked with instead of 20 different voters, I talked with 20 different community members. I think that they all would really benefit from X, and from there creating kind of out of thin air, like, okay, let's create a program about this. Let's create a guide about this, a webinar. So it's a lot more getting to exercise your own creative mind on thinking like, what does my day look like? How do I accomplish this? So definitely that was kind of the hard part for me when I started because I'm used to it being very clear on expectations and output. And with community management, it's just like the cool part about it is the flexibility of it.
Yeah, so you've not got those kind of strict set things that you have to achieve like the way you would in journalism and news.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like it's build a community that creates value for people and engages people. And it's like, okay, so how do I do that? Is it like let's try this, let's try that.
That's
It's a
such a
lot.
big question.
Yeah.
How do you build a community? Because it is something that we're told over and over again in our marketing and everything. This is what you need to do. You need to find your community, build a community.
Mhm.
But it's I think it's very easily said. But what if you're the one leading that community, hoping to bring in these people to have this, meeting of whatever, of podcasters or of whatever you want to achieve with your community. So my friend Sarah and I have started a podcast community as well. We have called the West Midlands Podcast Club.
Nice.
And I think, well, we have about 70 members now and we do like
That's
a
awesome.
regular meetup. But we have a Slack channel that we kind of like as our chosen kind of like to communicate in. And that's something that I'd like to increase the engagement and things like that
Mhm.
within those kind of channels. And just, it's more just about wanting to connect with other podcasters or aspiring podcasters and just talk about
Yeah.
podcasting. Is that kind of like your aim within your Riverside communities, talking with podcasters? Is that kind of feeling that you can, you just want to talk about everything that we come up against as podcasters or podcast hosts and how we want to move forward with our podcasts and things like that?
Yeah, so actually I would say that there's not like one size fits all for every community. But when I said before about journalism and the way that you collect a bunch of stories and then figure out what's the story behind it, that would be my number one recommendation. When I first started at Riverside, I spoke with a ton of different community members. And I came in thinking, okay, like I'm from journalism. We like we're driven by networking and making connections because that's kind of your currency in that world. So I came in thinking people want to network and make connections. But then when I started digging deeper into it and listening to people's stories and listening to what they want, it seemed like they wanted to make those connections in order to learn or get inspired or have somebody to ask their questions to. Or as Riverside's a remote recording platform, it can be lonely when you're remotely recording all of the time. So, community in that way, I decided for this community was going to be focused on learning, making you a better creator, but also making you feel heard by the product. So, it's kind of like a flow chart in the way that we're giving learning opportunities, a chance to connect with other creators virtually, in person, those types of opportunities to make you a stronger creator. And then they give back feedback, things like that, so that we can improve the product. And then we give back to them, hey, we saw that you wanted the ability to edit your transcript. Now it's available. So it's about feeling like they're learning and they're being listened to. Those are my two kind of like L takeaways. So I would say for communities, finding what people from your community would actually want and benefit from. So if are you going to want, like, are these people driven by wanting to connect with each other about the podcast? Are they driven by wanting to connect with, like, everyone share a recipe today? What's something
Mhm.
that, like, trying to figure out what drives them to be part of a community. And then my little pro tip is if you have a community for your podcast, I would mention it in your podcast from now and then. So I would say, "Oh my gosh, we had the funniest conversation over in the community group where one of our members, Sarah, said this." And the listeners, if they love your podcast, now they think, "I'm missing out on half the conversation. There's a whole conversation I didn't hear. I need to go listen." So that would kind of be my tip for driving people to your community if it's based off of a podcast.
Oh yeah, I love that. That's a really good idea. Yeah, the community's not directly about my podcast, but my podcast is about helping women in business get started with their podcast, and the communities for everybody who either wants to start a podcast, already has one. It's for all levels. And I would say, based on what a lot of people have said within the community and what we've had those conversations, is about that people want learning,
Mhm.
mainly like a lot of about growth or tips on how to get started. What do you use for recording and editing, and some marketing and promotional things. So I think
Exactly.
I mean, connection, I think, because you're right, it is lonely when you're recording, remotely, as fantastic as it is. And I think it is so fantastic that we can record remotely, especially with this software. And if you want to do video, it's so easy. If you wanted to do a 2-person interview in a studio with video, you'd have to have 2 cameras and all of those kind of things set up to make it look much slicker. So I think this is such a fabulous way to do it. But yeah, it is nice to speak to other people who are in the same boat as you. It's always nice to know that someone feels the same as you, whatever that kind of feeling is.
Yeah.
So
And I
yeah.
would also say when you're talking about women in business and entrepreneurship, I mean, it can be intimidating for people to start a podcast, but I always encourage people like to hop on Riverside and just record a meeting that they're having. And even that is just content. Just like if you're a CEO logging on with another like C-level like person at your company and just pressing record and just talking for 30 minutes, like that can even be your podcast. So just like not being afraid to just hit record and see how it works out, because podcasting can seem intimidating. But when you have software like Riverside and you could just press record and have your meeting, there's so many little pieces of content that you could even take out of it beyond a podcast. Maybe it's for social. Maybe it's you can download it and send it out internally to your staff so that they get a little bit of FaceTime and hear from you. So there are a bunch of different ways to repurpose content, repurpose video, audio, all of that that can really drive your business goals.
Hmm. Yeah, I love repurposing. I think
Mhm.
it's so valuable to be repurposing. One of my friends, Hannah, who I also manage her podcast for her, she does like 6 months of content. She bulk kind of batches. She has these t-shirts that say batch it crazy. It's really great. I love
Oh, I
her
love it.
merch. I know, it's so great. I need to get some of her merch. But she's got a podcast called the Showing Up Solo podcast, which is aimed at solopreneurs who want to get started with their marketing but don't know where to start. They might have started in business. So she's kind of like that ground up marketing. But she kind of has like a really great method about turning, like getting every last little bit of gold dust out of your content. So, you're recording a video. So you've got it for a video, you can have it for a podcast, you can have it for a blog, you break it down into your social media captions, Instagram reels, YouTube shorts, all of those types of things. You can use like rinse it for every bit of content that you can. And then a lot of it is evergreen because unless you are
Yeah,
a daily news podcast, you are creating content that's going to be relevant for your audience, depending on at what point they're joining you in their journey, where they are. So
exactly.
yeah, big on repurposing. I like to, because I think it's so easy to forget, especially if you are a solopreneur, you're a business owner, and there's a lot of pressure with marketing and coming up with content ideas, that you have a podcast episode, great, it's gone out, and then that's like the last it's ever heard of, and it's such a shame because you spent so much time creating that episode that people still want to hear that conversation, people still want to hear that advice you have to give, and then having the opportunity to share that again and again is really valuable.
Yeah.
And yeah, and what I do love about Riverside at the moment is those magic clips that they do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, some of them are a little bit off, like I haven't got them all, but I think I always ask it to do them, and then I go through them. I tweak them sometimes, but it makes my audiograms a lot quicker with the magic clips.
Yeah, I mean, so the magic clips is just like AI identifying the
Mhm.
most engaging moments from your episode. And so it's really like I found like when I do webinars for Riverside, I find that it's like it does it pretty well. Like it
Mhm.
identifies like some moments that I even forgot about and makes it so much faster to really like take these clips to put repurpose on social media. But it's a
Yeah.
robot, so I
Yeah, I
take
know. I
some
mean,
comfort in the fact that it hasn't completely taken over my creative brain yet. But it's just a matter of time as it refines.
yeah. I'm just amazed at some of the things that AI can do, and it does make it's so much easier. I mean, I tend to listen back. So when I'm doing my editing process, when I edit my episodes, I will take notes and, make little timestamps of where I might like to have an audiogram and things like that. But then having those magic AI, like you
Mhm.
said, sometimes it pulls up those clips so easily that I will listen to them and make sure that they're the point that I want to get across. And it names them as well. And I find that so handy. It just makes the whole process a lot slicker and a lot quicker. I think that's what we should be with AI, not worried about it kind of stealing our jobs, but in terms of helping us support with our clients and with our own work, that it can just help us get things done quicker. You can get a lot more output. If people want more output, you could create twice as much stuff for people if you wanted to. So
Mhm.
I just think I've been playing around a lot with AI, and I've just found it really really quite interesting. And I use Descript, and they've got some new AI tools, and it has a lovely one that sums it all up for you, and I thought, it was so good. I really enjoyed that.
Well, maybe we have something coming up as well on that
Oh,
front. Yeah.
yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, I did see that because you do have the transcription as well.
There's so much you could do with the transcription too.
Mhm.
I mean, like, you
Yeah.
can also like, once you have the transcription, you can use that to create show notes, you can use that to create bios or social media posts, anything like that. So it's cool. I would say that I'm less like, "Oh, AI is coming for the jobs," and more thinking that as we're trying to continue to be valuable in this market, that knowing how to use AI and leverage AI is just a really important skill to be able to have right now. And it's not that hard. It just once you actually get used to it, you can really leverage that to be able to say, like, "I can get my work done faster. I know how to train an AI bot. I know how to like to be able to show all of that just I think helps in the market now."
Absolutely. And it's where the technology is going at the moment, and trying to kind of keep up with, what's happening within the industry, whatever industry that you're in. And obviously for here, podcasting. But I think that, yeah, it's such a big influence at the moment. And I think kind of just backing away from it is not really going to do you any favors. Doesn't mean you have to, if you don't enjoy using it. But I think just giving it a try, because I hadn't tried chat GBT. It was a few months ago now, and I was on my friend Hannah's podcast, and we were having a conversation about AI. And another lady that was on the podcast as well, she's a Squarespace expert, and she was talking about how she has a conversation with her AI, and she says please and thank you and things like this.
Oh, I do
And
the same thing.
yeah,
I'm like, if
I
they're gonna
do
come
now.
take my job, I'll be nice to them in the meantime. I literally
Yeah.
say, "Will you please sum up this?" I was doing a webinar and I wrote like, "Please sum up this," and somebody in the chat said, "Do you have to like say please and thank you?" And I was like, "No, that's just me."
I've started to say please and thank you, but he goes, oh, you're welcome, and does all the replies to you. But I hadn't originally thought about it as a conversation. I thought about it as like a Google search, kind of putting it
Mhm.
in. But when started thinking about it as a conversation about trying, like I put in a transcript and then say, could you turn this into this, or could you pick out some highlighting points and things? And it just seemed to click for me. And it felt like I could just, with that conversation, get what I would like out of the AI to
Mhm.
help support you, rather than thinking that, it's just a know-it-all and it's going to tell you what to do. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So, so don't be afraid of AI. Give it a try.
Exactly. Give it a try, you
Give it
know?
a try. Well, it's been so great talking to you today, Kendall. Do you have any last little thoughts to anyone who might be starting a podcast, or maybe, the benefit of maybe joining a community like you host at Riverside to help, with your podcast and the learning aspect there?
Yeah, I'll do a 2 for 1 and say that if you're looking to start a podcast, I really would recommend it. I'm not just saying this because I'm the community manager of this group, but on Facebook, Conversation Creators by Riverside.fm. That is the community group. We have like over 12,500 creators on there. And it's just there, every question has been asked. I mean, you can probably find some that haven't been asked, I'm sure, and ask them yourself. But people are really, what I find really amazing about this community, not just Riverside's, but in general, the podcasting community, is that people, unlike journalism, are really, really willing to help. Like, having your sources in journalism is like that's your currency. And so here in podcasting, I found that people are really willing to share what equipment they're using, how they're coming up with better questions, all of that. So, not being afraid to ask. There are no stupid questions. There are tons of people who are willing to help. Find a podcaster that you like, find a podcast that you like, find somebody on social media that you love what they're posting, and try to reach out to them and ask them questions, or go on to our community group that I mentioned, and there are just a ton of creators who are willing to answer questions, help each other out, and it's inspirational. You get to see what other people are working on, see what's working, get constructive criticism. So I would say in this industry, leveraging communities is key. And I would also take it a step further. If you have a podcast about a certain topic, I mean, that's what you're podcasting about. I hope there's a topic. Joining other communities to try to get inspiration from them. So if you have a health and wellness podcast, joining these health and wellness communities, seeing what people are talking about, getting inspired by that. So using the power of community to inspire you and also learn from people, I would say is a great first step. And I hesitate using the word first step because you can kind of just keep stepping back to it, you know? So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. That's great advice. We will leave all the links to that in the show notes, so you can find that easily. Also, we'll pop in your LinkedIn there if people would like to get in touch with you and have a conversation with you after the podcast.
I would love that, really. If anyone wants to reach out, please do. We'll put the link in the show notes. But I love to have these conversations, learn more about what you're working on, find ways to collaborate. I mean, that's the way that we met each other. So I really welcome it and would love to continue the conversation there.
Yeah, it's been great connecting with you. And yes, I contributed to the guides that Kendall mentioned for the community guides, which was I felt very honoured to be asked, and it was really exciting. So I'm hoping that they're going out to help somebody.
Yeah, I'm really excited to release them. So basically, these are just I found that everyone watches YouTube videos and makes their own list of all the things they need to do when they're first starting out, but we're kind of just distilling information into easy to use guides. And that was when we were talking earlier about trying to figure out little ways to entice people in the community and actually get value out of it. So that was one of the first ways that we had identified, was just sharing information in an accessible way through these guides.
Mhm.
So really excited to have worked with you on that.
Brilliant. Yes, so I look forward to looking at some of the other guides that are out there as well.
Yeah, we got a lot of cool ones on podcast monetization. We got a checklist for promoting on social. I just finished working on one for a release form, like a templated release
Oh,
form. If people need that, just copy and paste. So those kinds of things. We're trying to cover really every step of the podcasting journey in some sort of guide.
they sound really valuable. When they're all released and everything, you'll have to let me know and I will, of course, share it with everybody here as well. So everyone can find those and have a look and see what they need from them.
Absolutely. I'd love that.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Kendall, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to connect with me or get in touch, then head on over to my website. If you liked the episode, then I'd love it if you could leave me a review in your chosen podcast app. Your feedback is much appreciated. See you next time.